Okay, I'll start with my name is Percy Schmeiser, and it's spelled P-E-R-C-Y S-C-H-M-E-I-S-E-R, and I'm from a prairie town in the heart of the prairies at Bruno, Saskatchewan.
I'd like you to take, let's say someone were to say, okay, you've got 60 seconds, maybe 90 seconds, to just describe to an eighth grade class what happened to you and why you're famous.
1998, Monsanto laid a lawsuit against me. It was a patent infringement lawsuit where they said I had used and grew their GMO canola, genetic modified organism canola, without a license. And we had never bought, my wife and I had never bought Monsanto seed, never went to a Monsanto meeting. And we, besides that, we were seed developers in canola for over half a century. And we're developing our own seeds and plants. And we were very concerned when we received that lawsuit because we possibly thought that our research and development was destroyed, or 50 years of research and development was destroyed or contaminated by Monsanto's GMOs. And that would have been the last thing in the world that we would have wanted, is any GMOs in our pure canola seed. So it was a patent infringement case, and like many countries of the world, patent laws come under federal jurisdiction, and we stood up to Monsanto at the time and told them, if you have any of your GMOs canola in our fields, then you should be liable, and there should be a lawsuit launched against you on the liability issue for the damage you have done to us.
And then what happened?
Then it, because we stood up to Monsanto, then it went to trial. It took 2 years of pre-trial to get to the main trial. But in the original lawsuit, I should mention, Monsanto had accused us not only of growing their GMO canola, they also accused us that we somehow obtained their seed illegally. And they went so far as that maybe we got it from a seed house or stole it. And in the 2 years of pre-trial, they had to, and they did, withdraw all their allegations that we had ever obtained their seed illegally. But they said it didn't matter. They had found some of their GMO plants in the ditch along one of our fields. So then we stood up to Monsanto, and it went to the Federal Court of Canada after 2 years of pre-trial.
Tell me, what has been your experience traveling around and speaking?
The experience has, if I look at what happened in 1998, and 1999, and 2000, how little there was known by people about GMOs. And as we got now into year 2005, there's a lot more information out, and more people are now concerned about the food they're eating and what they're feeding to their children and grandchildren. And there's more awareness out there. And how also the awareness of how our governments of both our countries, United States and Canada, were involved with the corporations to develop and promote GMO seeds and plants. So there's a lot more awareness out there, and a concern. People are more concerned, and I think too that a lot of people in North America have looked at the Europeans who are very concerned and don't eat GMOs. And why are they so concerned? Maybe we should be looking at what is happening here. And so there's a big more awareness, as I said, between now, what is happening now and what happened, say, 1999.
And your personal experience when you travel, how does it feel connecting to all these people?
Well, when we had that lawsuit launched against us in 1998, my wife and I realized, because we were seed developers, closely associated with the land all our lives, and understood the value of a farmer always being able to use his seeds or plants from year to year, those rights should never be taken away. And there was a couple of reasons we felt that way. We understood from our own farming experience that if you would take those rights away from a farmer, not to be able to use the seeds or plants from year to year, you'd stop future development of new seeds and plants suitable to your own local climatic and soil conditions. And we knew as seed developers that the new varieties of canola that we were developing, suitable to our own local climatic and soil conditions, maybe 100 miles away, it wouldn't do as well. And we felt if you would stop that, you'd stop that future development. And often I have said that with the corporations and with these company or seed companies, one glove does not fit all. And so that is where we felt that those rights should not be taken away. You'd stop that future development. There was another reason. We felt and knew this, that if you get down to say one or two varieties of a certain species of plants or seed, and you have some disaster, some disease, some blight get into it, you have nothing to fall back on. And we felt that's one of the greatest dangers with the introduction of GMOs. You lose your biodiversity, you lose your indigenous seeds, and you'd be controlled by a corporation. Imagine what would happen to the farmers of the world if all our seed supplies, all our seed stocks come under the control of a multinational corporation. They would have total control not only of the seed supply, but ultimately the food supply. And then also with that, the controls in regards to farmers having to sign agreements, contracts, taking basically their freedom of speech away, their freedom of expression away through these contracts. And so again, you would take the freedom of farmers away, of both speech and expression. And that's why we really stood up to Monsanto, for many of these reasons.
So how did you feel? I mean, did you feel burdened or grateful? Or where did you feel in that continuum, speaking around the world personally?
Well, I think that once it went to trial, there was a lot of stress put on, not only on my family, not only on my wife, but the stress that was put on my neighbors and many, many farmers that were in a similar situation like us, where Monsanto had come after them, accusing them of growing GMO canola or soybeans without, whatever the case may be. And we realized the distress that they were going through, plus what I was going through. And I felt that living in a free country, we should not be subject to something like that. But there was nobody here to protect us. So I felt then that I have to bring this message out to the people all over the world, not only North America, but all over the world, how a farmer could lose his rights overnight through patent law, how an organic farmer could wake up tomorrow morning and no longer own his seeds or plants. And I felt that that message has to be brought out. People were not aware. GMO seeds and plants were one thing, but the other main important issue to me was the control that these corporations wanted to exercise over people, over farmers, in control of their everyday lives or in their everyday farming operations.
So when you were speaking, did you feel like you were getting the message out?
I really feel that the message was getting out, because a lot of people knew a little bit about GMOs, the effects on the environment, the effect on foods and so on, but they didn't realize the control that went with it. As I mentioned before, with contract law, property rights of farmers, intellectual property rights of multinational corporations, and how far these corporations could exercise their control through patent law. People didn't realize the effect of patent law, because most people felt that patent law was to prevent or to help a person when he invented something, and they wanted to put a patent on to protect his rights in that patent. But nobody ever thought that a corporation like Monsanto that could put a new life form into the environment where they couldn't control it, and it could contaminate your crop, your neighbor's crop, and then this corporation like Monsanto could claim ownership because their gene, through cross-pollination or direct seedment, was in your crop. The issue of the rate of contamination didn't matter. If your crop was contaminated 1% or 2% or 8%, it all became Monsanto's ownership, what the court ruled. So they also ruled it didn't matter how it got there. If it came in by cross-pollination, or it came in by direct seed movement, by birds, bees, animals, or transportation when farmers were hauling their grains from the combine to their silos or granaries or to their seeders, planters, and so on. It didn't matter how it got there. And if it did and contaminated your seeds and plants, you no longer owned your seeds or plants. And we thought that was a real travesty, how farmers could lose their rights to their own property.
Did you ever have to turn over your seeds to Monsanto?
Okay, the first judge ruled that if we had any seeds or plants left, they would become Monsanto's property and we would have to turn them over. Now, Monsanto, we don't know how much of their seeds, of my seeds or plants they got, because they had said at one point they had gone into my fields without my permission, trespassed, stole some of my property, seeds or plants. We never seen them in our fields, but they admitted in court that they had done this. So Monsanto, I believe, does have some of my seeds or plants, and my neighbors back home, don't ever believe that Monsanto came after me for patent infringement. My neighbors feel that Monsanto came after me to get control of my seeds and plants, because we had developed canola varieties that were resistant to certain diseases on the prairies. And Monsanto knew what we were doing because we were seed developers. So my neighbors feel Monsanto really wanted our seeds or plants, and the whole issue of patent law or infringing on a patent law was just a front for them to get control of our crop.
Now, when you say they went on your property and took it, did you consider suing them for trespass and thievery?
Oh yes, but you know, I do have a lawsuit filed against Monsanto even at the present time, and it's on the contamination and destroying what we had developed over many years. And this lawsuit was registered in the Court of Queen's Bench in Saskatchewan about 2 years after they laid the lawsuit against me for patent infringement. After my trial ended at the Supreme Court in Canada, I have the option now to proceed ahead to go take Monsanto to court on the liability issue. But my wife and I decided not to, under the advice of my family and the consideration of my family, because I'm 74 years of age and my wife is 73. We knew that we would take Monsanto to court. We're looking at another 6 years of legal battle, hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal expense. And I didn't want to put my family through another 6 years of living hell to fight a multinational corporation like Monsanto. So what we decided, we would not proceed ahead with the liability issue against Monsanto, but in turn I would continue to travel around the world to tell people what Monsanto is doing to people, how they're suppressing people's rights and freedom of speech, and that also I would help organic farmers in their fight against Monsanto on the liability issue. And also my wife is an organic farmer, and so that is what I'm doing now, is that I'm helping other farmers, especially organic farmers, to protect their livelihood, and that they still have a choice, because already in Canada organic farmers no longer can grow 2 crops. Their choice is gone.
Which 2 crops?
Canola and soybeans. Our total seed supply is now all contaminated with GMOs.
Now, is Louise the name of your wife?
Louise is my wife, yes.
Isn't she suing Monsanto for?
Yes. The last, in fact, on March 21st of this year, which is 2005, she has Monsanto in court under the Small Claims Action, where she is asking for $140, a bill she presented to Monsanto, of contamination of her shelter belt and of her organic garden.
Shelter?
A shelter belt, which is rows of trees around your property. We call it shelter belts. And Monsanto had said throughout my trials, the Federal Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court, that all a farmer has to do, if he feels he has Monsanto's GMO canola or soybeans on his land or on his property, all you have to do is notify Monsanto and they'll come immediately and pick it out or pluck it out. And she did that. She realized that she had Monsanto's GMO canola in her row of trees, shelter belt, in her garden. She notified Monsanto and they didn't come. And so eventually she had it removed by a university student, paid the student, and then sent a bill to Monsanto, and they didn't pay it. So she then eventually in 2004 took Monsanto to court, and Monsanto, it's basically a liability issue, because in the Supreme Court's decision they said that Monsanto owns and controls that life form, or they owns and controls that gene. So if they own and control it and they put it into the environment and they can't control it, which we all know you can't control a plant once you put it in the environment, they are now responsible. So that is what the action is, basically a liability. Whether it's $140 or whether it's $140,000 action, it's all the same. It's a liability issue, and that could open a real floodgate for action against Monsanto on the liability issue.
Why does she think it's Monsanto's canola that contaminated the trees and the garden?
Okay, well, it's quite easy, because where we live, the shelter belts or the trees are sprayed with Roundup. And if you have Colorado spruce trees, Colorado spruce is immune to Roundup. And Roundup is used a lot to spray the shelter belts to maintain weed control. And when that was done in 2002, and given 2 applications, it was solid full of Monsanto's GMO canola, because it did not die after being sprayed with Roundup. And in the trials, Monsanto said this: any plant that does not die after being sprayed with their herbicide Roundup is their plant, has their gene in it. So based on what they had said to the courts, she then said, all right, Monsanto, it was sprayed with Roundup, it has not died, it's your property, it's your plant, come and remove it. Based on the evidence they gave to the court and what the judge said in this decision. Monsanto owns any plant or any gene in a plant, if that plant has been sprayed with Roundup and has not died, it's their plant. So yes, what you're talking about, those are all strong possibilities. But on the other hand, there comes a time in your life, like I said, I'm 74, you just wish that you could be back home, fishing with your grandchildren. And 6-7 years of legal battle and full legal battle and the publicity that went with it really changes a person's life.
How did it change your life?
Well, it changed my life in regards to having where I could have spent more time with my family, my children, my grandchildren. I missed a lot of functions. I missed graduations, when they graduated in high school. I missed other functions like hockey games or dancing or whatever that my grandchildren were doing. So it does change your life. Plus a life where I was gone a lot from my wife, traveling all over the world to bring this message. So it really radically changed from a full-time farmer and business person. My family also had a farm equipment dealership to one of public speaking and bringing to the world a message how people could lose their rights overnight, and the dangers of eating GMO food, the danger to the environment, and how how there's no such thing as coexistence anymore. That once you introduce GMOs, it's a dominant gene and will contaminate whatever seeds or plants it gets into.
You read my book, Seeds of Deception?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you notice that I with my interview with with my chapter on Arpad Pusztai, I described how the reporters came and filled his living room, and how he had the time months earlier when he was asked to review the stack of papers by his director and things. I got that no one had asked him those questions before me, and so I got new information out.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for new information for a storyline with you, because the basic information of your case I have you in reports after reports, and I can always call and check facts when I send you the details. But what I look for are stories of the most shocking or dramatic quality.
Well, there's, to me, what Monsanto has done in a number of issues, to me that was shocking, is how they would use their gene police. In Canada, they're their former ex-RCMP, and how they would advertise, not how, and still are, advertise in their brochures to for neighbors to inform on other people or neighbor on neighbor if you think they're growing GMO canola or soybeans. And I think that's a terrible thing.
So when I talk about the most shocking moment, that information will come out, but I want to do it through your eyes. I'm looking for the moments in the last 7 years or 6 years where you got your eyes open the most, or you got the most shock, or you got the most infuriated. Those moments exactly.
Well, I would say that what surprised me a lot is where a member of our community, a former ex-RCMP, worked for Robinson Investigation, which also worked for Monsanto, who was the one that notified Monsanto, hey, you better come out and check Percy Schmeiser's fields. I think he's growing or has some GMO canola in it. And that was a shock to me because I knew this person well. And how he could sell himself for money to a corporation to try and cause trouble to a neighbor.
First of all, what is the information that you got to determine that it was him?
Because it came up in court. Monsanto had to give the name of the person who informed that I possibly was growing GMO canola. So his name came up in court.
What's the name?
David Leischen.
Now, you were there when that happened. Who was the person that gave the name of David Leischen?
Oh, he worked for Robinson Investigation. And Robinson Investigation was the one that gave his name.
And so who was the person from Robinson Investigation that was testifying when the name came out?
I'd have to go back to my website on it. It was Shoe Check or something like that, but I'm not sure on that.
So it was their director or their owner?
It was one of the people that worked for. The owner is of the investigation firm is Robinson, who is also an ex-RCMP, and he had these other ex-RCMPs working for Robinson Investigation. There's another, I think, a point.
Let me just get the.
Yeah.
So you were in the courtroom watching him, wondering who it was.
Mm-hmm.
You had no idea.
No. Well, I had heard rumors from my neighbors.
And you heard rumors that it was Dave.
Yeah. Because at a party one time, they said after he had too much liquor that he was blabbing things out about me. And that had come back to me, but at that point in time I had no idea that it was him. Or
so how did it feel? Tell me the experience you had inside when you heard it was Dave Leischen.
It bothered me extremely because I was very good friends with his parents. His parents were a bit older than me, but still we associated a lot, especially like in small communities. I was in business with my father, and after that myself from equipment dealership. They had bought equipment from me, they had bought repair parts from me, and they were known as fairly upright citizens. And so that's why when their son, who had become had become a police officer and then had resigned from the police force, was the one to do that. So it came as a shock because I knew the family background.
And what did Dave get from it? Does he make a percentage on it?
Oh yes, I don't know what he would get. There was a number of things that they were paid commissions, or primarily farmers who informed on another farmer would get a free leather jacket from Monsanto.
But you think because he was working for the company that Monsanto hired that he would get additional compensation?
Yes, because being a farmer, he would farm in the summertime, but in the wintertime he would work for Monsanto and try and promote Monsanto's products. So he had a real connection directly with Monsanto, and then also as an investigator for Robinson doing Monsanto work. So he had a double role. Now, the other area that really surprised me, and it really surprised me what happened in court, was this. In court, Monsanto said they had gone to a seed dealer that that prepares seed for a farmer, or treats seed is the proper word. They treat seed for a farmer before he seeds canola seed. And they went to the seed dealer. Monsanto went to the seed dealer and said, anytime a farmer brings in seed, canola seed, to be treated, steal some of it, or take some of it and give it to us so we can check to see if it's GMO canola or not. In return, the seed dealer, it was a bribery sort of thing, under the table sort of deal. In return, the seed dealer would get a bigger commission from Monsanto on products that he sold from Monsanto. Normally seed dealers will sell chemicals or fertilizers. So this seed dealer, which was, the name was Humboldt Flour Mills, made this agreement with Monsanto, this bribery deal, as I call it, this bribery, stole farmer seeds without telling the farmers, some of it, when the farmers had brought their seed in to be treated, and gave it to Monsanto to be tested. That really bothered me, because I had done business with this seed company for many, many years. I knew the personnel and how they could then steal seeds from farmers. And I'm using the word stealing because to me it's stealing. If you take somebody's property without their permission, to me it's stealing, pure and simple. And when they did that, and you put your trust into these people, and then they do this and make a deal with the company to get extra money, that really bothered me. How they could do that. Sell out their customers to Monsanto.
Now, do you know how much Humboldt was stealing?
Apparently they took samples from every customer. Because when they do the check, they grow out what we call a grow out of those farmer seeds that they got illegally. Now, to give you an example, say for instance from Humboldt Flour Mills, they got 100 varieties. That gives them a great seed bank, doesn't it, illegally? But here's another point. When this came up, everything I told you came up before the judge. Where did you get the seed from? And they admitted that they had taken it from my seed without permission. And the judge admitted it. Admitted the stolen seed as evidence.
What I want to talk about are the moments of great shock and great eye-opening experience along the road of discovering that you had Monsanto seed. Oh, there's one other thing I want to cover. You know Rick Roush, the guy that followed you all over? He sent me stuff. I've never read it yet. But he claimed that you had sprayed Roundup on 2 or 3 acres and then collected the seeds of those that had...
Yeah, that's what Monsanto said, yeah.
All right. Is it true?
No. See what happened, so that in 1997, the Power Corporation sprays around their power poles and between the power poles and the road allowance to maintain weed control, because with our large equipment we cannot get around the power poles or between the power poles, so they either do it or they get the farmer. Like in my case, they pay us. So with a backpack we spray around the power poles to maintain the weed control.
So whose equipment can get around? Yours or
we used our own equipment, and the Power Corporation paid us.
Because they want to be able to bring their equipment around.
No, it's because it's cheaper for them to get a farmer to do it. They pay us.
Why do they do it?
Because to maintain weed control.
Why is that important for them?
Okay, if I farm my land and maintain weed control, and then the Power Corporation leave their property without maintaining weed control, and it spreads across my field. So there is a policy. They maintain weed control. And so they, 2 ways they do it. They can do it themselves to do the spraying, or they pay the farmer. In my case, they pay us because we have 2 miles along the main road.
So
Now,
there's 2
that
miles.
has been done,
You have a 2 mile along your road?
yeah, of power line. I have a 2 mile stretch of land.
Along the road?
Yeah,
Geez, that's a long way.
yeah, 2 miles. So you can imagine, you have to maintain weed control.
Right.
So anyway, and there's not only that, there's other reasons. The municipality, or you call them counties here, have a bylaw that states farmers have to maintain, whoever, weed control. You can't let a piece of land go and, and contaminate your neighbors with weeds, whatever. So what happened then was that in 1997, after this area had been sprayed again, and that probably was sprayed for 15 years, as long as Roundup was out. My wife and I were coming back from somewhere, so we drove past this one parcel of land, and I noticed, well, everything was brown around the poles, and there was some plants, not many, but there was some plants, canola plants that hadn't died. Everything was brown like this floor here. And I thought, well, that's something wrong here. As a seed developer, well, what's going on here? So that week, this was a Sunday. The Monday, I said to a person that was helping me, and he had done the original spraying, and I said, did you have the right mixture? And he said, yeah. And he said, why? And I said, there's canola plants that haven't died. And so I told him, okay, I'm going to go back out, mix me up a batch, make sure that the measurement or the formula is right. So we resprayed that whole ditch and around the power poles, which I estimate it wouldn't have been 3 acres, but we used enough chemicals for 3 acres. We sprayed it over again to see what would happen. Then we waited about 12 days, and those same canola plants still lived. They had a double dose. So then when harvest time, we have and that was only a small stretches in harvest time then, when I didn't do the swathing or the cutting of the canola. It's a 30-foot machine, so the machine goes and takes in, caught some of those plants, plus my regular field in 30 feet, because what was sprayed was probably maybe 8-10 feet like. And there's only a few plants. So when they say I sprayed 3 acres, yes, but not 3 acres of crop, because the crop had already been dead from this first spraying, you see. So that's how, it's a play of words. So yes, we sprayed it, and part of that seed went into my production the following year. How much we don't know, because we mixed seed together, as I told you, from all the land. We were seed developers.
Now, why didn't you hand harvest and destroy?
We were not aware. At that time, I wasn't even aware of GMO canola. Going back to,
So when it continued to grow, you didn't know why?
We didn't know why. And I'll tell you what my first impression was. Chemical companies always tell you that you should not keep spraying your land continuously with the same chemical, because the weeds will become immune. And that's a known fact. And it will happen. So because this had been sprayed continuously every year, maybe for 10, 15 years, initially I thought that these weeds had just become resistant to Roundup, or these canola plants. Plus the fact there was also a few dandelion plants that didn't die. There were some wild buckwheat plants that didn't die. And they were stunted, but they didn't die. But the canola plants were nice and healthy. So in harvest time, I wasn't there because I had a man to cut my field down. I had a man there to combine it. I never did it myself. So I wasn't even there, because what had happened at that time, I got hurt in an accident, and I had to have this neighbor. So I never told him what to do. He was a farmer. He knew what to do. He cut the field down. He didn't even know about these plants or anything. He just went and cut the crop down. And we put it in windrows like you do with hay. And we have a 30-foot machine, so you gather a fairly large windrow. So some of these plants got into that.
So at the time when you were harvesting in '97, you had never heard of Roundup?
I had never heard of Roundup yet.
Roundup Ready.
Because I'll tell you why.
Only
there was
5
very
people.
little in the papers about it, but you had to be invited to a Monsanto special informational meeting. That's exactly what they called it. And how that would come about is that the local
seed dealer, the local chemical dealer, or the local fertilizer dealer, Monsanto would go to them and say, get 2 or 3 farmers from your area and invite them to a special meeting. And this special meeting, Monsanto would buy them the best meal, all the liquor, everything. And basically they would brainwash the farmer and tell them about this new product on this market. How, and what I'm telling you is what farmers told me that I talked to after, you know, this case started. And in our area in 1996, in our whole total county or municipality as we call it, there was only 3 farmers that grew it. And one of these farmers was my neighbor. And my neighbor had never ever said anything to me that he was ever growing GMO canola. But afterwards, when I talked to him after I had contamination, I said to him, why didn't you tell me what was going on? Well, he said, they never told us at the meeting that it would contaminate. And he said they never did, just told us that we'd have increased yields and less chemicals, more nutrition. I can give you the name of one, who I don't think will mind. His name would be Elmer Borstmeyer. But he wasn't my immediate neighbor, he was a half-mile away. But still, he hauled GMO canola past my land without a tarp, or his tarp was broken, and he said he lost a lot of Monsanto's GMO canola. He was growing GMO canola. But I didn't know that until the year 2000.
And that was, what year was that he brought it by?
That he hauled it?
Yeah.
97.
97. That was...
And the other neighbor grew it also in 96. The one right next to me. And that neighbor admitted that there was a large windstorm in 1996 where there's not even a fence line in between our fields. And he said there was a big windstorm. I was not aware of this. That blew a lot of his GMO canola in our fields. But you have to remember this, is that after we spent a lot of money to try and find out where the contamination came from, we knew it almost had to be direct seed movement. I think that the fear issue, or the whole fear culture that Monsanto was able to establish, like on the northern plains of the U.S. and the prairies of Western Canada, was something that people didn't really realize that could happen in a free country, or free countries. And in our case, we never thought that this could happen to us. And I'll give you examples. Is that they would park on the field, alongside our fields, on the road alongside our fields for days at a time. They would watch us from morning to night what we were doing. And when we came out of the field to see what was going on, they would take off. But eventually we were able to get license numbers and to find out who these people were. They would even come into our driveway where we lived and sometimes park there for hours. And when my wife would come out of the house, well, they would take off. Or they would park on the road across from our driveway, but they could see our house quite easily, and sometimes for 3 days at a time be parked there. They'd go away in the evening, come back in the morning and watch us. A lot of times when my wife would come out, they would take off. And then phone calls. Better watch it. They're going to get you. Things like that. And I think one of the worst things that happened was that I was speaking at Parliament in Cape Town in South Africa. And I had given a presentation there, and Monsanto had heard that I was speaking there, and they flew up a person by the name of Wally Green from Johannesburg, one of their representatives in South Africa. And he also demanded from Parliament that he could speak. And they gave him, I think, approximately 5 minutes. And in my opinion, he basically bombed out. He said there was no such thing as cross-pollination. There was no such thing as seeds that can blow in the wind. And he got laughed at in Parliament. The African members laughed at him because they knew better. They knew there was such a thing as pollination, cross-pollination, direct seed movement. And coming out of the assembly, we ran face to face into each other. And my wife was with me at that time in South Africa. And he shook his fist in my face and he said, nobody stands up to Monsanto. We're going to get you and we're going to destroy you, and when you get back to Canada, you're going to be in bigger trouble. I thought, my goodness, what bigger trouble could I be in that I'm not already in? And my wife got so excited when she heard this threat from Monsanto's rep, she fell down the steps and broke her shoulder in South Africa. So when we got back to Canada, sure enough, Monsanto laid another lawsuit against us, which a lot of people don't even know about. It was a lawsuit for $1 million because they said I was arrogant, because I was stubborn, and I wouldn't do what Monsanto said. So they now wanted all their disbursements costs, all their legal costs, a fine, and they said, well, that was not even the fine, but just disbursement costs and legal costs for $1 million. So back to court again on another lawsuit from Monsanto against me for $1 million, which took over a year. I don't know how many thousands of dollars that cost me. And in the end, the judge ruled, and it was the same judge that ruled at my original trial, because he had that privilege to rule at my original, to rule on the court costs then that Monsanto wanted. You got to remember, I'm only halfway through my case. They want $1 million already, trying to stop me. So after a year and I don't know how many days of trial, that same judge awarded Monsanto $153,000 court costs against me for their costs. Now, it was very unusual, some of the things they had asked in their court costs. They asked $750,000 for their lawyer fees up to that time, $250,000 or $250,000 for disbursement costs. Now, it was very unusual what they had included in some of those costs. First of all, they had said, to give you an example, they wanted $1,100 for a digital camera they said they used in court. You can't use a camera in court in Canada, and there was never a camera used. So when they were questioned on that, they said, well, I guess we made a mistake on that. Then they had a $1,500 item for night entertainment for their lawyers while they were at the trial. So I often question what kind of entertainment that was. But those are some of the things that, how they tried to stop us, not only through harassment and intimidation, but then how they tried to stop us financially, because after that, we did not have to pay Monsanto anything, the court ruled, until the last avenue of appeal is exhausted. What did Monsanto do? They put a lien and a caveat against all our property, our land, our house, that we couldn't borrow any more money to fight them. So they tried to break us down mentally, and they tried to break us down financially. And at that point in time, then I went to the world community and said, look, I'm prepared to carry on, but I cannot do it financially anymore because all my assets are now tied up. Because we had mortgaged some of our land to pay our legal fees up to that time, which were probably close to $300,000. So that's how they control farmers. Farmers that stood up for me in court or testified on my behalf, believe me, got a letter from Monsanto. One farmer got a letter from Monsanto who they accused of having land in canola, and they wanted so many thousands of dollars from him. The land wasn't even ceded to canola, but it's just a means of intimidation and harassment. He didn't even have it planted, that land that they accused him, even planted. But he had testified on my behalf. And he caught them in his canola field, another canola field. And he said, you're trespassing, you're stealing, what are you doing here? Get out. And they laughed at him. And he said, well, I'm going to take you to court. He said, go right ahead. If you do, you won't have a farm left. So they told my neighbors, if you support Percy Schmeiser, excuse me, we're going to come after you and you won't have a farm left. So that whole fear they put into people. And I'm not alone. Many, many farmers that they came after. There's so many parts to this. Initially, at the first trial, they gave me up to 1 minute to settle with them. They did come with a settlement offer, and they always bragged about that. They tried to settle out of court without going to court. But this is what the terms of the settlement were. Initially, they wanted $200,000 from me. I would have to pay all my court costs up to that point, which probably was $150,000. But the worst thing that they wanted, they said I would have to sign a non-disclosure statement of what the settlements were, and I could not talk about a gag order. I could not talk about Monsanto. Well, it gave me 30, I think when my lawyer mentioned it to me, it took me 30 seconds to tell Monsanto basically where to go. Because never will I ever give my right up of freedom of speech. Never. And especially not to a corporation. And that was their offer. And they bragged about in court how they tried to settle with me. $200,000. All my court costs up to that point in time, and a gag order.
Now,
And that's what they done to other farmers. Gag orders.
you said that you got phone calls that were threatening. How many of those did you get?
I would say neighborhood of half a dozen. I don't know for sure how many my wife got. A lot of times she never told me until later on. I was home only once, when I myself, but she was on the front line always.
And when you got
And not only that, before we go any farther on that, it wasn't only from phone calls. Even our friends told us, we're scared for your safety. And I'd say, why? And they would hear, in the small communities, a lot of the farmers, they would be taken by Monsanto's rep to some function. Monsanto came in and took farmers on big fishing trips 200 miles away for 2-3 days, bought all the liquor, all the meals in my home community. And so you can imagine what these farmers were told by Monsanto's reps. And some of these farmers that went on these fishing trips or to these big suppers and so on, they're the ones that came back to me and said, you better, we're very concerned about your safety. And that's what led us to start taking a rifle with us in a combine, in a tractor. Not only me, but the people that worked for me, or my hired man, or my neighbor. So it was a real fear that we lived in. In fact, when I went away speaking, my wife never stayed at home alone. She'd always go to one of our children. And we made very sure that we never gave to the press the names of our married daughters, their married names. Because we didn't want to see their children or our grandchildren being harassed by Monsanto. So those are the fears that we lived in. Especially and that's a lot of times I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd say to myself, wonder, is this worth it all? That what I'm putting my wife, and not only my wife now, but my family and my grandchildren through.
You said that you had known other farmers that were involved with Monsanto where they followed their kids to school?
Apparently one in North Dakota, that's what I was told.
Do you know who it was?
He doesn't want to give his name out. They're still living in fear.
Farmer,
North Dakota.
Monsanto followed the kids to school.
Exactly, yeah.
When you got the license plate numbers of those that were stalking you, where did they lead? Where did that lead?
The license numbers of the people, okay, they were either Monsanto's representatives or they were Robinson Investigation Police.
So how many?
I got about 6.
6 license plate numbers?
Yeah.
And how
And
many?
I also got now this is really unusual, I also got a license number that was neither Monsanto's police or neither Monsanto's rep. He was a scientist that worked for Ag Canada in Saskatoon, but also was the witness for Monsanto. Talk about government working with.
He worked for
Ag Canada as a scientist.
And he was a witness for Monsanto.
And he was a key witness for Monsanto.
What did he say?
Well, in my trial, he testified all that you don't have this kind of cross-pollination, and it was too large, and when he many things that when he was questioned, and then he was asked by the local city newspaper, Saskatoon Star-Phoenix, where he got all this information. And would you believe his answer? This is a scientist. He says, I only used the documentation supplied to me by Monsanto. So all his scientific knowledge of Canada, he only said what Monsanto told him to say.
So what was his name?
Keith Downey.
And you say you got his license plate.
Mm-hmm.
How long was he? What was his behavior? Was he behind? Was he outside your field? Was he in your driveway? What?
Well, he was on the. He was caught along the field or the driveway.
You don't know which.
The driveway. Yeah.
He was actually on the driveway.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He was in your driveway.
Yeah, on the field, on the one of the fields.
Oh, so he was in the field. So he pulled off the driveway onto the field.
Okay, you have the main road and then you have a short driveway into your field. And that's where he was. Now, he was questioned about that in court. And if you go to that, he said he never got out of his car.
Uh-huh.
He was very, he didn't realize that we had his license number. So.
How long was he there for?
I don't know. See, what would happen was that my neighbors, I had neighbors, I said, if you ever see a vehicle or anybody in the fields, let us know. So a lot of neighbors were pretty good. And they saw somebody close to my field or walking in the field. But a lot of times there's a time lapse because I'm about 8 miles away. And a lot of times when I got there, they were gone. Huh? Sometimes they would be just driving away or whatever.
And he was a scientist for the government.
Yes, Canada. Scientist for the government.
Interesting.
And, here his wages come. Oh, here's the other thing. He formed a company called, I can't think of the name now. And this company, his company that he formed, he's an ag scientist for Ag Canada. Was doing work all the while for Monsanto, and he was using his office in Ag Canada's building in Saskatoon for his company. You know, that could be another whole story and thing that I could go after the whole government now. And I notified the government at one time, and they said, well, they'd check into it, but they were working with Monsanto. They were using government test plots, government research station.
What do you mean?
Ag Canada, Monsanto was working with Ag Canada to develop GMO canola, GMO wheat, and that first came out at my trial. We never knew that. People didn't know that. Farmers didn't know that. Monsanto was working with Ag Canada, using Ag Canada's test plots, research stations to develop GMOs. So here you have an Ag Canada scientist, well, he's right in bed. So instead of working for farmers, he's working for Monsanto. And for his work for Monsanto against me, when there were some good things when Monsanto came out of after Monsanto wanted the $1 million, because Monsanto had to show how they arrived at the $1 million. This Ag Canada scientist, Keith Downey, they had his wages in there too, or what they paid him, was close to $30,000. Is what they paid him to say what they wanted him to say. Because he admitted the documentation he used was from Monsanto. A lot of people have said he sold his soul to the devil.
Tell me about those phone calls again. What were some of the statements that were made?
Mostly they were all the same. You better watch it, they're going to get you. Huh? We probably, we didn't realize at the time, my wife didn't realize that if she would have hit a certain button on the phone, that she could have, had got where the call came from. I mentioned, the main ones I think I've mentioned, um, watching a person, phone calls, and then how to try and discredit a person. They did their utmost to discredit, to ruin a person's reputation.
Tell me about your.
Yeah, and that is, they really tried to work hard to discredit me. My testimony was not correct or that. And that, to me, is, I knew that corporations did this, shoot the messenger sort of thing. And they would come into my community. To give you an example, when they had their meetings, or they get farmers and took them fishing, or took them to football games or to curling games, they'd invite farmers. They would say things to these farmers that, which would be against me, and that he really used our, even though they admitted in court that I had never bought their seed, they would try and discredit me and say, oh yeah, but he really did this, and it isn't really what the court said. We know different, and so those sort of tactics. And so what initially was the hardest thing to get over, you have to remember, I was a member of Parliament, or the member of the provincial legislature, and I was on many, many agricultural committees, and I was known as a person to really work for farmers' rights, rules, laws, and regulations that would benefit farmers. So when Monsanto laid that charge against me, that lawsuit against me, many of the farmers come to me that supported me in political campaigns and worked. They came to me and they said, Percy, you must have done something wrong. Monsanto, it's a big company. They wouldn't come after a farmer. We're their customers. And so that was one of the hardest things to get around. But after a year or two, a lot of these farmers found out how Monsanto would come after them when they started getting investigated or checked on their acres and to see whether they were growing GMO canola or soybeans without a license. But it took a year or two, and that was an awful time in our life, as to how they tried to destroy a person's reputation.
It took Monsanto's organized farmers to go where?
On fishing trips. And these were not small. When you take 10, 15 farmers, 200 miles, and you got boats, cabin, meals. So these are not cheap entertainment. It's not like inviting people over for a hamburger or something like that, and a drink.
Mm-hmm. These
were expensive trips.
So,
and they did it, I don't know how many times.
See, it's important. I want to ask you to consider, I'll write you a note, farmers taken on Monsanto trips. Mm-hmm. And then farmer in North Dakota, kids stalked.
Yeah. Watch them when they went to school, yeah. And that's terrifying. To give you another example, they got a fuel dealer and a chemical dealer from my hometown to testify against me in court in Saskatoon at the first trial. Mm-hmm. And he had said that he had spoken to one of the people that helped me, and this person told him that I had used Roundup on my fields. And so he testified on behalf of Monsanto. This is what this one person said. Well, eventually his whole testimony was thrown out. The judge ruled it inadmissible. But this is what, when he was questioned by my lawyer, he said, well, when did this person say this about Percy using this chemical? Well, he said, I think it was in 1997. Then he said, when he was questioned on that, because it didn't match up, I think it was in 98. Then he said, I think it was in 1999. No, then finally he said, I think it was 2 weeks ago. Well, by that time, people in the courtroom were laughing. And then my lawyer asked him, have you had any association with Monsanto? Well, he says, I sell their products. Well, he said, have you been taken anywhere? And he said, yeah, I've been taken to the city of Saskatoon, Monsanto at Innovation Place, which is a big, huge sports and entertainment complex, and Monsanto has a box there, a private box there, where they can watch the performances. He said, yeah, and so they questioned him on that, and he said, yes, he said, I've been invited there, and so what happened at this box, and it was a curling briar or curling playoffs for Canada, the national playoffs. Oh, he said, they had a big meal for me, and did they have whiskey? Oh, yeah. They had lots of whiskey. Was it good whiskey? Yeah, it was good whiskey. Did you drink a lot of whiskey? Yeah, I drank a lot of whiskey, but by that time people were laughing in the courtroom, you see. And so finally the judge just said, that's, that's enough. It's inadmissible. So when he came back to Bruno, I tell you, he was a fuel dealer, and I bought my fuel there for that company for 30 years while he was just, and so you can imagine immediately there was no more fuel being bought by him. But that's how they were bought off. Then another farmer told me.
You mean you stopped buying fuel from him?
Yeah. Then shortly after the trial, another farmer came to me, and he definitely, I can't give his name, but he said 2 of them were approached by Monsanto during the trial to testify, to say things negative about me. And they were offered $20,000 worth of chemical, no cash, but chemicals, if they would come and testify against me on certain issues, negative issues, or things that were basically not true. And that was not the only 2 people that come and told me that. There was another person that worked for a company that sold chemicals, and he said Monsanto came to him, because he was selling Monsanto seed. Monsanto came to him and said, well, first of all, they bought him, like every Friday night they'd buy him a dinner, or so he was a dealer for them with one of the seed companies, one of the bigger ones in Western Canada. And he said, we want you to give us some seed and say it was Percy Schmeiser's seed. And we will give you chemicals in return for doing this. And indeed he did do this. He produced seed, and I had nothing to do with the seed company, but he said he obtained the seed by getting from a former company, whatever. So he testified for Monsanto against me that this was my seed and he had been given it and so on. So about a year, in fact this was in June, the following February or March, there was a function for one of my granddaughters. I think it was a figure skating function. And this person that testified against me came up to me. And he made small talk. And he said to me, and I'll give you this person's name even. And he said to me, how are things going? I said, well, I'm still in court. And he knew that I didn't want to talk to him because when they said things that were totally false. And then he said to me, I want to talk to you sometime. And he worked for this, he was also a farmer, but he was also the manager of the seed department of this seed company. So indeed, I did go out went to the seed company first, and which in the next town. And he was at his farm, so I went out to his farm. And he told me, he said, look at these pails here. And they were Monsanto's Roundup herbicide spray pails. He said he apologized to me for what he had done. And he said he was bought by Monsanto. He was given chemicals to do what he did. And he said he took seed, Monsanto's seed, give it to Monsanto to have tested and said it was my seed. But he could easily do this because he was a seed dealer for Monsanto. And And I said, you perjured yourself. You lied on the stand. And he said, yes, I know. And this was, like I said, probably April, May. In July, the man was dead. I didn't know when he talked to me that he had some kind of a liver ailment or cancer of the liver. I don't know. But I often, that's what a sad part. And I often wondered that he knew he was dying, and I guess he didn't want to die with that in his mind. But that's what, why I'm bringing this up. And his name was Morris Hoffman.
Have you told anyone this in the press?
I told my lawyer.
Did you tell anyone in the press?
No.
Okay.
No.
You're
one of the first ones. My wife knows all about it because she was with me when he first spoke to me at this function for my granddaughter. And she said to me right after that, she said, what is this all about? What's he talking to you? Because she was still upset, and rightly so, for what he testified in court. And it was an unusual thing. The bag of the seed he presented in court was within a SAS, oh boy, he worked for SAS Wheat Pool. I don't want that down though. Huh?
Worked for what?
He worked for the seed company. I just about gave you the name of the seed company. I don't want that.
Okay.
And he had a bag of that seed company with my seed in that he presented to court, and I never dealt with that company. And the judge should have realized that. And it was totally different seed than mine was seed, what we call bin-run seed with chaff in. The seed he presented was perfectly clean. And when my lawyer told the judge, this has been run seed, it isn't the seed, the judge ignored it. So that, I really felt bad, after that.
Explain that about the difference in the seed.
Yeah.
So the seed was his seed was clean.
That he presented, yeah.
And you had
I had, in my seed that I had, was bin run seed with had chaff in.
bin run.
We refer to that as bin run when it comes out of the combine, put it into a bin or silo, and that's bin run seed because you have not put it through a cleaner or anything. And that was the seed that I had, was bin run seed.
And you never put it through a cleaner?
I never put it through a cleaner.
You never ever put it through a cleaner?
Well, sometimes I did, but not this year, not that year. Because a lot of times my seed was really, really clean. We didn't have to clean it. And I never took, I wouldn't take it to a cleaner because that was one of the worst ways that you could get contamination in different types of weeds. If you take it to a commercial cleaner and you haven't cleaned it and somebody else had it there, there's always some foreign matter. You cannot get a cleaner perfectly clean. The same thing with a combine. You cannot never get it perfectly clean.
So we call contamination even from GM varieties.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Now, when he showed you the pails at his farm, did he tell you how many dollars value he had gotten from his testimony?
No, he didn't. But I would say it would have been, okay, a pail of Roundup is roughly $80, $90. I would say.
How many pails?
I would say at least $1,000 worth of the pails I've seen, if they were all of his, that he got all of them. But he just said, "Here, look," just like that. And along the end of his shed, it's a big shed. These pails were laying.
Is he married?
Yeah.
His wife's
And that's why I have not said too much. Two or three children.
What's his
He was not an older man,
What's his wife's name?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's in, if you want more on that story, it's on my website.
The story of you going.
Yeah, of Morris Hoffman.
Okay.
That was a hard thing to do, to put it on the website. He's dead. His wife is alive. But and his kids. Especially this latest one.
What's the latest
Where
one?
one in December I mentioned where they wrote to a farmer and said it's your best interest if you want to keep farming in the future to settle with us. That's a real juicy one. That's the most blatant one I've seen, and that's December 14th or 12th of just this past year.
Wow.
And it got his name. In fact, that one is on my website, right front page.
Okay, about the last one I can think of is that a local businessman was also a farmer, and he had bought Monsanto's, signed a deal, an agreement to seed 200 acres of Monsanto's Roundup Ready canola. When he was done seeding, he came out at 208 acres, and that's quite normal. You're not going to come out to the exact acres. He had signed a contract for 200 acres, but he came, on his crop insurance, he put 280 acres, the actual acres he seeded. Monsanto came out to do an audit or to check, and Monsanto has the right, if you sign a contract, I don't say, but they do it, they'll ask for a farmer's income tax records, their farming records, or whatever. So they came to this farmer businessman, said, we'd like to check your records, to see about your acres. So they checked his records and found that he had seeded 280 acres according to his crop insurance. Signed a deal with Monsanto to seed 200 acres. So the technology fee, or tech users agreement, is $15 an acre. So they said, you cheated us by $15 an acre on 80 acres, which I think was what, $140 or $120. And well, he said to them, I didn't cheat you. I paid you for the seed. I came out at 208 acres, and that's what I seeded, and I paid you for the 200 acres. Well, they said, you should have reported that to us. So, well, he said, I did it unintentionally. I had no intentions of, and he's, a really down-to-earth, honest person. He said, I had no intentions of cheating you. And he said, it's $100, and I paid you so many thousands of dollars for the seed. So they said, what we're going to do to you, we're going to fine you $200 an acre. Plus you have to pay us that extra, on the extra 8 acres. So the guy said, well, that's going to destroy me if I have to pay you a $200 fine. He said, when I tried to be honest and give you all this information, so finally they said, okay, we'll give you a different proposition. You have to pay us the $15 on the 8 acres, but for letting you off, you're a businessman, you deal with a lot of farmers in your business for repair work. If you hear, you must report any violation. If a farmer says something that he's grown Monsanto's GMO canola, we want to know the name of the farmer, try and find out how many acres he seeded and so on, and you have to supply us that information. So he said, this is when they left, but he said he never ever turned in or said anything about one farmer. But that's the deal they want, to get a spy. I think it's still running, I think. To spy on neighbors. You give me another...
Where was he located?
He was located in my hometown.
What's his name?
I can't give it to you.
Okay, that's
yeah. Because Monsanto would come after him with a hammer like you wouldn't believe. I had one couple, a farm couple, that finally sat down with the Dutch people when they did a video, and but not on camera, and said how they were harassed, intimidated by Monsanto's police, but they only did it once because they were so scared. Because when you get threatened, you won't have a farm left. You're going to be dragged through the court system. That's a big fear, and yet on one hand a lot of these people felt they have to get that out. So it's what I said, the culture of fear. And Monsanto is great at that.
You said you had one other story?
Okay, what was that one? I think it was the one I just said that they gave an interview about the fear. and how they wouldn't go on another, anymore, even though they didn't have their faces on, huh? And how Monsanto, 2 police come into their home and threaten them and said, you're growing it without a license, and if you don't confess, we're going to. And how I knew about this couple is because I basically saved his life at one time, and in an accident, and so he gave it to me, but he said he'd only do it once.
So where was the interview?
He's in my farming area.